Now we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of vowels. Let's see. We've already seen this ah, aw. This is a short vowel. This is a long vowel. The accent mark is called a fada, which means long, or shina fada, which means long stretching. Fada is spelled F-A-D-A, fada. So this is actually a medieval shorthand device. Because scribes in Ireland had to work very quickly to copy hundreds and hundreds and thousands of manuscripts, they developed a shorthand system of hundreds of nodina, which are shorthand devices. This is a surviving shorthand device. The fada is actually a surviving shorthand device. Show you exactly how. If they had to write two A's together, they, instead of doing that, which takes time, they would do the A fada. If they had to do two O's, they would do the O fada. If they had to do two U's, they would do instead the U fada. If they had to do two E's, upside down, they would do an E fada. If they had to do two I's, they would do an I fada. And that sped things up. There are a whole bunch of shorthand devices like that, hundreds of them. This one survives. Now we should talk about broad versus slender. We have 5 vowels, as you saw. A, O, U, E, and I. A, O, and U are called the broad vowels because they look broad. E and I are called the slender vowels because they look slender. Now, that's important because they determine the nature of the vowels, whether a vowel is broad or slender, determines how the closest consonant in the same word is pronounced. You're actually already used to that. You've seen it before. Here we have Sean. Now, Sean, as you see, the S is slender because the closest vowel in the same word is an E. E and I are the slender vowels. They cause Sean to be pronounced as, they cause the S to be pronounced as a sh sound. Now that N is broad because the closest vowel in the same word is that A fada. You've also seen this, Siobhan or Siobhan, depending upon your dialect. The S is slender. The BH in the middle is broad. It's surrounded on each side by broad vowels. And the N is broad. So the S is slender because the closest vowel in the same word is the I, and we know that I and E are slender. So a slender S, in other words an S which has closest to it in the same word a slender vowel, a slender S is pronounced as a sh. In contrast, we have this word, psalm or psalm. This is a psalm from the Bible, which in English would be P-S-A-L-M. So the S here is broad, as you see. So that's a S sound instead of a sh sound. S instead of sh. The L is broad because the closest vowel in the same word is the A. The M is broad because the closest vowel in the same word is the A. Puka. P is broad, the C is broad. The C in the middle of the word is surrounded by broad vowels so that we know that it's broad. We don't have broad on one side or slender on the other. That would confuse us. We wouldn't know how to pronounce that. Since the 12th century, when the prophet poets took over the language and regularized it, since the 12th century, this has been the rule, broad to broad or slender to slender. If a consonant is in the middle, it's going to have broad on both sides or slender on both sides. Now there are exceptions. You have some foreign loan words, you have words spelled before the 12th century, and the government beginning in 1958, they fooled around with the spelling and they messed up a few words. Very few. There are only a few exceptions. Now let's take a look at this. Cade Mila Falta. Now that's again in the Connemara dialect, the Kasharaga dialect. Up in the north, that slender T. Notice that T is slender. It's got an I on one side of it. It's got an E on the other, so we know it's slender. Up in the north, that would be a cha, a TCH sound, falcha. But in this dialect, in this Connemara dialect, it's falta. Cade. The C is slender because the closest vowel is slender. an E fada. The D is broad, so the closest vowel, we see the closest vowel is broad, so that's a broad D. The M is slender, the L is slender. The F is broad, the L here is slender, surrounded on either side by slender vowels. The T is slender, surrounded on either side by slender vowels. A consonant is not innately broad or slender. A consonant is broad or slender depending upon whether the closest vowel in the same word is broad or slender. Bar, the top of something. Put my drink on the bar. Put my drink on the top of the counter. The B is broad, the R is broad, the R is broad. Alp, a lump. The Celts didn't think very much of the Alps the way the Romans did. The Romans thought the Alps were a big deal. The Celts didn't think they were such a big deal. They just called them lumps. So the L is slender and the P is slender. An Alp is a lump. Thram. The D is broad. The R is broad. Here I'm saying ra instead of a tight r, the way I would if it were slender. The D is broad. Da, dram. The M is broad. I'm not doing a slender D. I'm not doing a tight D like that. Slata, a slat, like a slat in the fence. The S is broad, so I'm saying slata. I'm not saying schlata. I'm saying slata. The L is broad. The T is broad. The A is broad. The T is surrounded by broad vowels on either side, so we know it's broad. We're not confused. In this case, it happens to be surrounded by the same vowel on either side. It doesn't have to be the same vowel. Brish. We have here the slender S, so we know it's slender because the closest vowel is the I. We know we have to pronounce it as a sh because the closest vowel is an I. It's a slender S, therefore. The B is slender because the closest vowel is an I, and the R is slender. So I'm doing a tight r instead of a broad ra. Brish. This means break. You're probably familiar with the ancient Gaulish debrisha, from breaking, which comes into modern French as debris. Bard. This is a praise poet. It comes into English as bard. The B is broad because its closest vowel is the A fada. The R is broad, A fada. The D is broad because of the A fada. Plod. Americans would say plaid. I would say plaid, but that's plod. There's probably some dialects would say plaid as well. The P is broad, the L is broad, the D is slender. Colleen, a girl. The C is broad, the L is surrounded by slender vowels, which happen to be, well, this is a short I, this is a long I. A long I. The N is slender. Whoops. Tiernon. On means little. Tiernon. Little Lord. You're probably used to seeing this as Tiernan. The T is slender. The R is broad. The N is broad. And that N is broad. Again, depending upon which is the closest vowel in the same word. Ronon. Little seal. Ron is a seal. On is little. Little seal. Ronon. You're probably used to seeing this as Ronan. The R is broad. I'm saying ra instead of a tight r. The N is broad. It's surrounded on either side by broad vowels, and that N is broad as well because the closest vowel in the same word is a broad vowel. Sean. You've seen that. S, slender, sh, or, n. The N is broad. Sean. Okay. Next we'll do consonants. We'll look at broad and slender consonants and how to pronounce all of them.